talk more about this new report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Let's bring in François Gemène, an environment specialist and a member of the IPCC. You're also a lead author on this report. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. This report, the report's going to be released 2 weeks from now. Talk us through the process about what's going to be happening between now and then.
Well, right now, the coming 2 weeks are the approval process of the summary of the report, which is intended for policymakers. That means that government representatives will discuss this summary and will need to approve this summary so that they recognize that they can use this as a basis for future negotiations and hopefully policymaking. So it is important to remind that the IPCC is an intergovernmental organization. The reports are commissioned by governments, so before they are published, they need to be approved formally by governments, and this is what these 2 weeks will be about to do. Usually, this is a kind of shorter meeting taking place in one city in particular, but given the pandemic, this is spread over 2 weeks and conducted online.
Now, I know you can't share yet what's in this report in detail, but can you talk us through perhaps the major differences between this one and the last report, or the increase in stakes perhaps today?
Sure, absolutely. So it is important to understand that the IPCC is divided into 3 working groups, each releasing its own report. Working Group 1 is about the measurement of climate change. Working Group 2, the one we're discussing right now, is about the impacts of climate change. Working Group 3 is about the solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. What will be new in this report is a better articulation between the ecological impacts of climate change and the socio-economic consequences of those in terms of development, in terms of inequalities, in terms of migration and security, for example. So we've really tried to better articulate the socio-economic impacts with the ecological impacts of climate change. And this is an aspect which I think was lacking so far, and hopefully the report will fill in this gap.
How did you go about investigating and preparing the report in that respect?
Well, basically, first, we do not conduct any new research. So the report is a synthesis of existing research which has already been published. So we select the best, most robust pieces, and we try to make them understandable for the general public. And then the report is submitted to the wider academic community for comments. I mean, some 17,000 comments have been submitted on this report. We address each of these comments individually, and then we're now coming to the final stage where the report is approved by government representatives.
What about this notion of adaptation, which is climate speak, if you like, for preparing for devastating consequences that can no longer be avoided, things like intolerably hot days, flash flooding? Is that becoming more and more the main focus at the moment, more than actually trying to reverse climate change?
I wouldn't call it the main focus, but this is clearly an increasingly important avenue in the fight against climate change, because we realize that even if we were to curb greenhouse gas emissions very significantly, radically, we wouldn't be able to avoid all of the impacts of climate change. And these impacts are already there, and they can be witnessed in all parts of the world. And for these reasons, there is a pressing need to adapt to these impacts.
So how does the process continue? 2 weeks from now, this report will be published. A third report is due to come after that, as you were mentioning. Then what?
Absolutely, in April. In April, and then once we'll have the 3 components of the report, hopefully it will serve as a basis for future negotiations, including the negotiations of COP27, which shall take place in Sharm el-Sheikh in November of this year.
So speaking today, the UN's climate science chief said the stakes in the fight against global warming are higher than ever. Just to wrap up, what are your hopes for what world leaders can and should do with this information?
I'm hoping that world leaders can finally choose a way. I think that we've told the story for many years now, and we realize that the time window is very short and that we're really at the crossroads where we need to make choices. So talking about climate change is good, but that's not enough. And now we need to make choices, which is difficult to do for policymakers. And there is always a tendency to try and please some interest, including interests related to fossil fuel industries. Now the time is for the choice, and I'm hoping that policymakers can find the courage to make this choice.
François, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us here on France 24. François Gemène, environment specialist and the lead author of the IPCC report. Thank you.